And a lot of those went to Zooms. So the experiences, you can imagine, for those students at the time was really limited. That was kind of sad that we all had it pulled back. But for the jail, I agreed, and they offered the opportunity to be on the staff, because the staff became so limited and was just cut back to its bare minimum. So there was, I think, 9 or 10 of us on staff to service, at that time, about 1,500 inmates and staff. So you don't just service inmates, you service staff too. You're there for everybody. Before the pandemic, the chaplain's office would have facilitated and managed multiple church groups, volunteer groups, offering, different studies and running services on a weekly basis and mentoring different incarcerated people to help them through the programs. But all of that got shut down, and it was very limited. And so they were thrilled, the director of the Chaplin program at the time was thrilled that they could bring in an intern to work. And I was excited and nervous and a little scared, especially after that first day of orientation where you go through all of the locked doors and the bells and the whistles and the metal detectors, and you can't bring anything in with you. Everything has to remain out. You can't even bring in your car keys past a certain point. You have to trust that they're going in a little cubicle and they're going to be there, and your phone. No electronics inside the jail. So it's an interesting experience of incommunicado. How many of us always talk about just taking a day where you put the phone away or you disconnect from technology? You can do it. I did it 3 days a week, so you can do it. But I also felt, first I felt this exhilaration. It was really a wonderful strengthening from God to feel. And I would have a day where I would come out of the jail, and it generally was always very serious, sometimes traumatic experiences, but often helpful, and God's presence was amazing when it was obvious, especially. And I'd call my husband after I finished the day, and I go, "It was a good day in the jail, honey." And he'd be like, "You're the weirdest person in the world." But you just felt that. So I would do worship service. We would do some religious instruction classes if inmates, it's hard to break the habit, so incarcerated folks were seeking to either join a church or reinvigorate their faith background. We would do a lot of one-on-one counseling. That was really primary. And we would do grief counseling when we would get records from folks who would come in, or we would get calls from family members to say that a family member had died while somebody was incarcerated. I'm going to pass these pictures around, and we'll start with you. This is a picture of the Allegheny County Jail itself. It's a huge complex. If you think about, how many floors are on the Cuyahoga County Jail? I don't even know, but it's a massive tower. This is like 2 or 3 of those. It's a huge complex. And then I'll send also these pictures of internally, so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. This next one's going to come around is what's called the pods, and I'll explain that in a little bit. And then this last one is the chapel. And I just want to make sure I'm keeping on time. We're good? Okay. So we would, those are the kind, we would offer basic one-on-one counseling, grief counseling, worship service, religious instructions. We would also put together basic packages for hygiene for the inmates. So we were the resource. When they first came in, they would get a package from us that would contain hygiene products, really simple things. A thermal shirt, because it was freezing in this jail all the time. It felt like it was freezing. And then we also did all the specialty holiday services, and we packed the Christmas packages. So you have to be very sensitive on how you're presenting all of this material. You have to be sensitive to the fact that not everybody's a Christian. I mean, you're talking a population of 1,500. They had a significant Muslim population. They had a significant non-population. And some of the things you worked with, especially on the one-on-one counseling, really dealt with some, what we call now in the VA where I'm working, moral and spiritual injuries. Because when you start getting into their lives and they open up, and a lot of times they will give more information to a chaplain because there's this sense of confidentiality. You know, they wouldn't tell a psychiatrist or a social worker some things because of reporting, what I'm trying to think of, requirements. Thank you, Cindy. But they would tell a chaplain. Now, the chaplain has to disclose right off the bat. If there's anything going on, you're going to tell me anything at all that could be harmful to yourself or harmful to somebody else. There is no level of confidentiality here. I have to report that. So you have to be very upfront and open with somebody when they're choosing to disclose and be more familiar. And I'm sorry, I'm moving around. Am I okay with it? You're good? Yeah. Thank you. So my request started right off the bat. It was like boots on the ground, baptism by fire, here you go. And it was actually the same at the Cleveland Clinic. We had 3 days of orientation. I had never done chaplaincy before, and then I'm the lone chaplain on the weekend call. And it's like, hello to the world of chaplaincy. But this pretty much started off the same. My director was great. She walked through a lot with me in the first 2 weeks, but then it was, you're on it, you're going. And you would get requests from chaplains to just talk. Here's another issue that was happening with the jail at the time. They were on a 23-hour lockdown, which meant they only got, when I first got there, it was 23 hours. Halfway through my tour, I'm going to call it, now I'm trying to keep in military VA language, it went to 22 hours. But, so that meant inmates were allowed out of their cells only 1 hour a day for exercise and movement. And it was hard, and it was tense. So they would sometimes call for a chaplain just to get out and have somebody to talk to. And you know what? That's okay. That's what I'm here for. I'm not in the jail as a chaplain. I'm not proselytizing. I'm not an evangelist, which when you start to look at some programs around Cleveland or Pittsburgh, that's their core objective. But when you're actually a staff chaplain, and this is true for the VA as well, you're there to serve everybody, and you need to be sensitive to everybody. So if somebody just wants to talk, my sense as a chaplain is that I may not vocalize this to you, but I am God's presence for you. And if I can feel that I am God's presence, then I trust that God is present. And to be frank, there wasn't a day that went by that I didn't sense and know God was present. As a matter of fact, there were times when I would get through a really tough discussion with an inmate in which they would share, you know, they weren't sentenced, they're waiting to, or they weren't accused or booked on, they were booked, but they weren't actually accused of anything yet. They were still waiting for that to come through, and they're sitting there with way too much time on their hands to think about things, and now they're going through their life story, and they're sharing how their brother was murdered last year, their mother died of a critical illness 6 months ago. Just the list of trauma that they lived through would be overwhelming. And we were all wearing masks. Everybody had to be masked up. And I can remember more often than I like to think about coming out of one of those interventions or encounters and stopping and saying, in the elevator by myself, oh my God, what just happened there? You know, because there would be something that would be a connection with the inmate, with the incarcerated. Just a way they change their look at you to say, okay, we made a connection, okay, you felt some compassion. I think we've made the building blocks of a relationship and we can talk again. And I get in the elevator and I would literally be talking to myself out loud, going, oh my God, what just happened in there? And then I'd stop and realize, oh, there's cameras everywhere. And then I think, oh, but I have a mask on. They can't see my lips moving, so I'm good to go. Although my hands are probably like, oh my God. So, you know, you just have these overwhelming experiences, but they're wonderful. And the people that I worked with, even though, you know, you're put out onto the floor, I had lots of good time and mentoring to come back to the staff chaplains that had been doing this for years and years and years, and sit down with them and say, this just happened. Can we talk about this? My director was always open to that. This just happened. And then we had the great opportunity in field ed to come back to the class, and my field ed director, and do a verbatim or a case study to say, okay, I need to process this, and this is a good, safe place to do that. I'm blessed to have that happening still here in at the VA as a chaplain residence, to have all those same opportunities with the staff and with the educators to process what's happening. Because I'll jump a little bit in here for a second. The mental illness, trauma, spiritual and moral injury that I experienced in working with incarcerated people flowed right into the VA. There is so much to do for our veterans. And we are blessed that the Cleveland VA is at the front of working on programs to specialize in chaplaincy for mental health and spirituality practices for veterans. So it was that 9 months at the Allegheny County Jail was just a foundational experience for the next step of where I'm at now. And I would say that we don't, you know, I had mentioned that it wasn't just the incarcerated folks that we touch base with. It was staff we tried to reach out to. But that is a pretty closed group. They are a pretty tight bunch. And they tend, which is another experience that moved right into a military ethos and culture, they tend to really pull in the wagons and protect themselves. So the times when a staff member would reach out for help was precious. And you know, because the atmosphere, the environment, and the reality of incarcerated people can really make staff have a tendency to get cynical and untrusting. And so, it happens. There are people there are incarcerated people and staff people that play the game and work it for their own benefit. It's a reality of things. But the people who genuinely want to help as staff, and the inmates or the incarcerated people who genuinely reach out, you know, it's really hard sometimes to distinguish between the two. So it takes some time to build a relationship, to understand the language, the culture, and to find your place within it. And I will be frank too, even on the chaplain side, there was a couple of chaplains that kind of gave up on it all. They were still there, they were going through the motions, but you could sense the cynicism, and their first reaction was usually, don't trust them. Don't let them suck you in, Kathy. Or, I'm sorry, Cindy, don't let them suck you in. And then I have to sit back and say, okay, there's a genuine need for that person to share this information with me, and I need to reflect on it. I need to think about it. I need to see how I'm going to respond, and I need to take that seriously. I'm not just going to fluff it off like, oh, yeah, go retire, they're done. No, these are dedicated, committed people, and they have their own reasons for where they are and why they're thinking that way. But for the staff, then, we would offer a daily centering prayer, and on one of the pictures, you saw a little circle of chairs. If I could get 4 chairs filled, it was a good day. And then we would have boxes of prayer requests. If we got 1 or 2 prayer requests a week, it was a good week. And then we would do some one-on-one counseling. I had that happen a couple of times in my 9 months there, but I saw very little of that. They didn't really. So this is the other issue that you deal with in the chaplain world, is that the organizations don't always sometimes see the value of the chaplain work. And maybe if we have time for questions and you guys have questions on that, we could talk about that too. And then we also did some really nice special services for them, services of remembrance for officers that had died, services of special medal honors, and so we were integrated with them in that way, and they appreciated it. So, and as I said, a lot of what I did there continues now on in my work at the VA. But the value of what we do, which is what I think is so important, especially when you're talking about incarcerated, because if we're talking Matthew 25, and I might be getting on the soapbox here, so I'm going to beg forgiveness after I do this. The disparity in race and income in the jail, if you don't see it while you're there, you have blinders on. You choose to not see it. It's so obvious and prevalent that to find justice for these people whose lives are just totally turned upside down even before they get there. Yes, they may have made bad decisions on the way that got them where they are, but there is real need to sit back and stop and reflect on what got them to that bad decision. What were the influences in their life? What was the impact of their income, the discrimination in our culture, the institutional biases, and the personal biases? And I tell you, even to this day, I am just smacked on the back of my head every time one of my own personal biases comes flying out, and I have to stop. And thankfully I have people around me that will call me out on it. And I'm like, what? Where did that come from? Like, I had to admit to a current resident peer who's he's actually from Rwanda, so I can't call him African American. Although no, he is a citizen, so I'm going to call him African American. Something happened in which I did not hear the racism in the language of text on a PowerPoint presentation. And he called me out on it, and I had to say, you are right. And he was being very kind to say, Kathy, you're not a racist. I know you're not a racist. I said, no, stop. I am by nature of, I grew up on the west side of Cleveland in a bubble. I've lived here all my life in this bubble. And it's this experience at the VA, it's this experience at the county jail that I'm choosing to do, to pop that bubble so that I can understand my biases and work through them and hopefully get people like me to not be so sensitive about it and see it, because it's not going to change until we see it. We have to embrace it. We ask people who make bad decisions to embrace their decision making, but we don't turn that lens on ourselves too often. So in the jail, you really see that disparity, and it's hard, and you can't help but well, for me, it couldn't help but, fuel the fire to do more, and you see it now, I see it very much in the VA and the veterans, and how we treat them and why they serve. So it's, it's really something to take home and reflect on. And we can talk, if you have questions, about what might be going on around Cleveland that we could do, or what we might be thinking about with our own presbytery that we could do. But I want to end my sharing of experience with you with this quote that I really love, and it's from George MacDonald. I don't know why I've all of a sudden gotten hooked on this Scotsman, George MacDonald. And it says, "Justice, to be justice, must be much more than justice. Love is the law of our condition, without which we can no more render justice as a person can keep a straight line walking in the dark." So I open the floor up if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Yes, Cindy.
I have two questions. The one, maybe this is, you can say, Cindy, I'll talk to you about this later. But the first question, though, is how can we be involved? How can we support? Do people write letters? I don't know. How can we be involved with people in jail or in prison? And the question that maybe you want to defer to an individual conversation is, do you see cash bail as one of those things that causes the disparity that you're describing, that people don't have the ability to pay bail if they're poor? If they're rich, they can, so that's why they're not in jail.
So if you'll allow me, I'll answer the second question first, and that will probably feed into the first question. So the second question, the answer is yes. And I don't even need to go more than that. Yes, absolutely. The whole process or policy of cash bail is a huge stumbling block, obstacle to people of lower income. And it's a very, very big reason why people sit in the jail waiting to be charged, because once they're booked, they can't meet that bail. And so, yes, absolutely, that's a big disparity, and that speaks to then income inequality in our culture. So how can you help? Well, with regard to that one, you vote for politicians that will change that policy. So that gets a little bit on a political soapbox, but it's got to be, the policy itself has to be changed. And I think our current vice president was working really hard to change that policy while she was in the Senate. But those Senate bills are still, and House bills are still working their way. They haven't been completely thrown to the side. There are some, we have here in the Presbytery, there is it works through the Lutheran Metropolitan missions or ministries. And I know in our own presbytery, we have, what am I thinking of?
Oh, Edwards?
Well, we have, we're looking at homelessness, we're looking at racism. So all of those areas feed into what's putting people in, what's incarcerating people. Prisoners coming out of, incarcerated people coming out of the jail. Let's say charges get dropped. They've been in the jail for 5 months, right? Waiting for to be charged or not to be charged. Charges get dropped. They get a nice bus ticket. They get $20. You're on your way. Well, more than likely, they've been in jail for 5 months. They've lost their home. They've lost their job. If they had any resources to travel, probably gone. I mean, we have to think about what happens once they walk out the door. And so dealing with, helping people with homelessness, helping people find, those, we have a few in our area, but I couldn't really find that many that weren't like evangelical based, and I don't mean to diss that, because there's plenty of people though that are coming out that, might not be coming from a Christian background, and you still want to, they're still our neighbor, we still want to be able to help them, right? It doesn't diminish and so I'm going to add this, it doesn't diminish my faith if I'm not just talking Christian language. Does that make sense?
Yes.
My faith is core. My strength is in my faith. And my foundation is in the life that Jesus Christ lived and suffered and died and rose for. But I don't have to talk the Christian language every time. Now, if the door opens and I'm given an opportunity because the Holy Spirit has spoken to somebody else, you can bet I'm walking through that door. But I'm not. It's my actions that speak to a lot of people. And the actions that we do open the door more in many instances. So working with homeless, working with finding job resources, working with politicians who are going to change things like getting people who have served their time the right to vote. I think we're still fighting that in Ohio. If they're done, they should have the right to vote. I mean, it's talking about, and I'm going to call you out, I might not be invited back, but I'm going to call Jim out. It's changing our attitude. Because Jim mentioned, I've been to the jail, but you quickly followed it up with, only to visit, to make sure, well, what if Jim did go to jail? Should we care? Should that be?
I wanted to assure them that that wasn't hidden away in my past.
not a little secret side note on your CV?
And Kathy, I have a quick question, and then I think we're probably close to 12, but did they have female and male incarcerated at Allegheny, or did you just work with men or women or both?
They had both.
Okay.
It was a very small population of female so what I showed you was pods, so they had 3 pods dedicated to female. Each pod could, in the general population pods, could house up to 100 inmates. I would say maybe 200 female inmates in comparison to the other side. They had very small mental health. I did have an assignment where every week I went to the male mental health pod, and in that instance you could only talk to inmates through doors. They could not come out to you.
So primarily, were you ministering to women or men?
The full population, but primarily to men.
Okay.
Because that was the dominant population.
Okay, so I'll throw out what, I don't know, call this whatever you want. I'm guessing that was helpful to some men to unburden themselves with a woman that maybe for them that seems compassionate and kind and caring. Maybe more so than a man. I don't know. I'm just imagining.
It was helpful. It does make a difference, especially in a male macho culture. Yes,
Yeah.
because you would not show the same kind of. They would deem it as weakness. So as soon as we got into conversation, I'd be like, to show your emotions is not weak. To be upset and want to cry is not weak. And oftentimes, and this was true for the guards and the officers as well as the incarcerated folk, they would say right off the bat, no, if anybody sees me, I'm done. So for a male, women never were concerned about crime. That was not part of their culture to be worried about. For men, it was always seen as a weakness. And so it was easier for them to disclose to me as opposed to a man.
I know I'm supposed to stop asking questions, but I have a question. You were there during the height of fatalities from COVID in incarcerated populations.
Yeah.
How did that affect your work and the inmates? I mean, they knew they were there, and it was like a death sentence for some of them.
The Allegheny County Jail actually did a phenomenal job at isolating. I mean, the isolation was brutal, but the isolation saved. And their rate of deaths was really small, really small. Now, there was always that fear of, and we would end up with full floors being COVID restricted. And then we can't go. We weren't permitted to go onto those floors. But I will give them a kudos that they did a fantastic job of holding down those numbers. So, but it was a constant cloud
Yeah.
over the place for everybody.
An additional cloud.
An additional cloud, yeah. And we had probably as many officers and correctional staff end up getting sick as we did incarcerated people.
Wow.
I hadn't gotten it before I came, so they were happy to see that I was already done.
I have a question. You talked, and I appreciate you making a differentiation between jail and prison. So we understand that the jail is a place that is kind of like a holding pattern for these people until we can process them through the legal system. But as far as an impact, if churches want to get involved on a boots on the ground kind of thing, is it more in the jail system or is it in a prison system where prison systems, I would imagine you could establish a longer term relationship because these prisoners are there for a period of time. But boots on the ground of a church wanting to get involved in a jail prison ministries, where is that? Is it, and specifically, what kind of programs do jails offer?
So I wasn't able to really find what the Cuyahoga County Jail's chaplain's office, and they do have a chaplain's office. As I said, that is required by law to offer those services. The federal level, on the federal level, you go through the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and it's a big one of those long acronyms. They have a formal chaplain staff, and they don't really hire too many, but they rely heavily on volunteers to come in and help administer their programs. It is still pretty closed right now with the pandemic winding down, but it is. I was just talking to a friend of mine who's still at the Hope Foundation. I was just talking to her yesterday. They are starting to open it up again and starting to bring in, they're just now starting to let visitors in. So that had been shut down for a long time. And so they'll start opening up the programs again to get volunteers, and it will be on the chaplain's agenda to start reaching back out to churches and organizations that will send in volunteers to help with running services, doing studies. They leave the professional counseling side to the chaplains, but there's lots of prayer groups, centering prayer, mindfulness activities that other folks can volunteer for. So you have to watch and contact directly. So if this church, say, was interested in something like that, you would want to probably designate somebody to start reaching out to the actual chaplain's office at the county jail and see when are they going to start accepting, what programs they run, and where do the volunteers fit in.
Thank you.
And what they're accepting too, because there's materials you can send that are very helpful to help the incarcerated folks, fill their time.
I'd just like to make a statement, and then my youngest brother is a recovering addict, and so he has been involved with he lives in Phoenix. He's been involved with going into prisons, and just got into a new one where he and another guy or another person take in NA meetings to people and provide literature, and so they have to go through some backgrounds checks.
Yes.
So that's.
Yeah, you will have to go through a background check before you'll be able to just enter. You have to have some signatures or vouchers from staffs in the county jail. In Allegheny, you did anyways. And that's another area. Addiction recovery is a very good area to get involved in order to reduce recidivism, returning incarceration. So all of those we have actually our feet in the water for already. I'm not sure we necessarily see the connection it makes to this particular part of our culture and our society.
Thank you
This
so
has
much.
been so interesting
Thanks.
and helpful. I just can't tell you how much we appreciate your being here and sharing with us. And we've really sensed the impact it's made on your life. And who knows how some of those experiences will help you in your ministry as you go forward. So thank you for being here. And let's give her